Shalom, welcome to our Erev Shabbat talk. Today the Baal Shem Tov is going to take us to another understanding of Shabbat through the metaphor of a secret letter. There was once a king who sent his son to a far-off land, and he found himself amidst people of a low moral stature, shall we say. And the people did not consider this prince a prince at all. They didn't know that he was from the royal palace or family, and they treated him like everybody else treats each other, and it wasn't particularly pleasant for the king's son, who was used to the manners and the habits and the customs of living in the palace of the king. So this, of course, is something that we can all relate to when we've traveled and we've gone to other places and we're living in cultures that are not familiar with. And certainly if we're used to living at a high standard of moral and physical existence. So this son of the king one day received a letter from his father. And he wondered if he should tell the people that he was living with, his friends at the time. And he realized that if he told them, they would make fun of him and they wouldn't believe him. But if he didn't tell them, that they would never really recognize who he was and who the king was. So he felt it was, in a certain way, his obligation to tell them that he was the son of the king. And also he was choshesh, he was worried that if he did tell them that he was the son of the king, that perhaps they would make fun of him and the king, etc. So you see, this is a situation that every person could find themselves in as a religious Jew, especially. I'm a son of the king. I've been sent to a faraway place. I have a mission. I have a job. When I tell people about it, they're going to laugh at me, or they're going to make fun, or even worse, they're going to hate me, depending on where they're coming from. But at the same time, if I don't tell people, and if I don't live according to the standard that I am used to living, then I'm not doing my job and I'm not honoring my soul. So living in this paradox of choice is not a simple thing for somebody who appreciates who they are, who appreciates their soul, who appreciates the gift of life and the gift of a divine soul. And the son of the king also wanted to be happy, and he wanted to share the fact that he finally received a letter from his father. So what was he going to do? So he set aside a day, and he invited all his friends to a meal. And he bought all the nice things that you have for a meal, and his friends came, and they were happy. They were happy to have good food and good wine, and etc., etc. And the king's son was happy, really, not because of the food and the wine, but because he had received this letter from his father, the king. So when we understand this, we understand another aspect of Shabbat. That Shabbat is this time that we look forward to good food and good drink. And that is, of course, our physical self, our lower soul, as it's called. That our lower soul looks forward to things like that. You know, that the brain even releases serotonin when I even think about eating. And I haven't even eaten yet. And there's all types of chemicals that are happening in the mind as we anticipate pleasure, different types of pleasure. Those are still the lower aspects of pleasure. But the higher soul is looking forward to that time with the king, that time alone, that time with the king's communication, with that letter, those words. And maybe, you've ever gotten a letter where you reread it 2, 3, 4 times because there's something in there that you just have to capture, that you have to hold. And maybe it's a little less common today than it used to be in the days of snail mail, but I remember getting letters and sending letters and reading them over and over, and it was quite pleasurable because the person's soul is in those words. And that is proven out by graphologists, and Rabbi Nachman talks about it in Likutei Moharan, that the tzaddik, a person, can see the soul of a person in his handwriting. Now, I don't know about if a person can see the soul in the pixels, but or in the all the different fonts that you can get writing in, but handwriting itself is a very personal, intimate thing. If any of you are writers, I highly suggest to write your first drafts with pen and paper, because there's something about the process itself that elicits a deeper self. Okay, anyway, so the king's son is enjoying the Shabbos, this meal that he makes for his friends, even though they're not even involved with the Shabbos. And he doesn't actually tell them that he got the letter from the king, but rather at a certain point they say, why did you make this meal after all? Well, the truth is, he tells them, I did get a letter from my father, finally. I've been waiting a long time to hear from him. He said, really? You got a letter from your father? Well, that's wonderful. Great. We understand. L'chaim, and open another bottle of wine. Well, who is your father? One of them asks. My father, well, he's the king. The king? Come on. They start to razz him. And he's like, well, really, actually, it's true that I was sent here on a long mission, on a long journey to be with you. And part of the mission was to tell you about my father, the king, that he wanted you to know that you're in his kingdom and he cares about you and he's looking after you even though you don't know it. Ah, come on. They continue to mal'ig in Hebrew. It's a good word for that. Loeg, right? To make fun of. And he's like, well, this is the true story, and I wanted to show you my appreciation and my joy that my father sent me a king by having you over for a festive meal. Now, when the person is sitting there full of, chicken soup and steak and salmon and wine, it's going to be hard to not be appreciative of the son of the king and his meal that he's made for them. So this is part of the idea of feeding the lower soul in order that the upper soul can be happy with Shabbat. That when we are able to satisfy the lower physical needs, we can automatically access the higher pleasure of Shabbat and Yom Tov and the Torah, the pleasure of learning Torah, the pleasure of meditating on the Torah, the pleasure of serious discussion about real questions and real issues in life. All of these pleasures are very hard to access when you're hungry and you're thirsty and you're tired. But when you're satisfied and your mind is at ease, then the mind is able to rise up to higher levels of contemplation. And that's where the lower soul and the upper soul begin to separate, if you will. The physical soul is allowed to rest on its own, and the upper soul is allowed to climb into more exalted places. So this idea is something that we experience every week. And halavai, that we should feel and experience the sense that there is a letter in the mail from the king every week. And that letter is published in my heart. That letter is published with the excitement, the pleasure, the appreciation, the rest of Shabbat. But I have to do a few things to enjoy that letter, right? I have to prepare my home. I have to prepare myself. I have to prepare the family to receive the Shabbat in a way that you would if you were still living in the palace. Now, very few of us are living in palaces. And I have a feeling that if you lived in a palace that really was made of gold and silver, like some people do live that way, I don't think you would feel the Shabbat any more than you would feel it in a pleasant home environment, if all other things being equal, that you were able to experience that spiritual joy of the presence of God. Because the presence of God is this invisible pleasure. It's this sense of something else. And sometimes it takes you in your mind far away imaginatively, and sometimes it opens your heart with love and gratitude, and sometimes the divine presence feeds you insights into things you didn't know. And sometimes you understand something that you didn't understand before. And sometimes you look at someone you love and suddenly you know what they're thinking and what they're feeling. All of these are little aspects of that letter of God's presence, especially on Shabbat. And we can understand from this why we say that the true tzaddik, for the weekday, it's like he's still in Shabbat, because he's still operating at that level of the upper soul. And this is a goal that we have each week, is to drag some of Shabbat into the weekday. That's why we have Malava Malki on Saturday night, right? We have the Escort the King. We make another meal. We sit together. We sing. We dance. We play music on Saturday night, because we really don't want to leave Shabbat. Just like sometimes you go on vacation, you don't want to leave vacation. You don't want to go back to the everyday reality. But when we treat Shabbat properly, the Shabbat stays with us. And sometimes during the middle of the week, you could think, I want to get something for Shabbat, and it's only Tuesday. That's actually Shabbat calling you. It's a spark of Shabbat in you from the past week going into the next week. So you'll see that the more you honor the Shabbat, the more you will think of it, and the more pleasure you'll derive from those little things you do. And it might sound a little bit silly, but if you're walking through the aisles of the busy supermarket on a Monday or a Tuesday, and you just reach out and say, I'm going to buy this for Shabbat, you will have a tiny spark of pleasure of Shabbat. And these are all little insights that the tzaddikim have given us, and thank God for them, because they experienced it or merited to write it down and share it with us. So God should all merit us, give us the pleasure. And merit in Hebrew is zechut. Zechut is from the lashon zach, meaning pure. That merit is a measure of purification, because behind all creation is Shabbat. Behind all creation is the unified light that animates all the diversity of the world around us. So that's what we're all about here in the world of Torah, and in certainly what we have dedicated ourselves to here on our Patreon site, and developing the journey to the ultimate self. That this is why we're here, and this is where we're going. So join us. Check us out also on YouTube and on Facebook, and let your friends know. And I hope soon you'll be getting some gifts in the mail. And please send in your addresses to Ariel, our business manager, because we are looking to continue this relationship, and excited about watching it grow and watching the people come alive. And if you read some of the letters that we get here, it is quite inspiring. So maybe someday we'll read some of those letters. But have a great Shabbat, and look forward to seeing you next week here on Patreon. All the best.